course, to LinkedIn, and obviously on Spotify and Apple as well. Rate us, write us comments, tell us what you like, where you think we're full of As Tim mentioned recently, we're big boys. We can take it.
No,
So
no, I don't like it. I don't like criticism. I am a Cancer. I am incredibly overly sensitive.
The point is we can take it. We don't know how we're going to react when we do
don't
take
like it.
We don't.
We'll
we definitely
it.
don't like it.
No,
we definitely don't like it. But if it gives us a reason to fire back, no, we certainly prefer it just being all positive. But yeah, whatever.
Welcome to Wait What? Sports Biz Chat with DP and McGee, the podcast where we take a sometimes irreverent, a sometimes cynical, and yes, even a sometimes serious look at the business of sports. I'm your co-host, Tim McGee.
And I'm David Paro.
David, before I hand it off to you, as we typically do on this show, I just got an email shortly before we came on the air. It was one of those Google alerts, where you put in key terms and then you get articles sent to you. And one of the articles said, sponsorship of X, and I'm not going to mention the property, is more than just logos on the eye. And I won't mention whether it was court or rink or
jersey,
outfield wall, or whatever. If you're reading that article and that's news to you, please call one of us immediately. It's just a public service announcement for those out there who may be in need of help in your sponsorship efforts. So,
listen, the sales side of this business, I think we both greatly respect, and techniques are techniques, I suppose. But yeah, that where are we? It is 2025, correct?
Yes. So what's on your mind?
First of all, I do want to, send as positive vibes to all those affected in Texas by the floods, particularly those, of course, in Kerr County. Just an absolute tragic situation there. Just thinking about, obviously, all those families that are affected, as well as those first responders that are out, trying to make the best of this situation and recover what they can. But it's just absolutely a horrendous situation.
Yes. Yeah. Devastating loss of life.
Now, this is going to probably be the worst transition of all time coming from that. And I don't mean to make light of that, what we just said, but I want to start back on high noon on Friday, 4th of July, at the corner of Surf and Stillwell on Coney Island with the Nathan's hot dog eating contest. And just kind of, the legend builds. Banned from last year, not able to compete. Joey Chestnut comes back and eats 70 and a half. I love the fact that they give him a half, by the way, 70 and a half hot dogs to not just win again, but to annihilate the competition. And I just can't help but wonder, how is no one even getting close? The nearest competitor ate 46 and a half. And he's the guy that won last year when Joey was out, by the way. Patrick Bertoletti, a Chicago guy. I want to kind of pull for him. He's a Chicago guy. I think he's known in poutine eating circles, so he's huge in Canada.
By the way, I love poutine. I had it for the first time only a couple of years ago. It was like crack. I couldn't stop eating it.
Yeah. And by the way, I love hot dogs too. Not necessarily the way that they eat them at the contest, because I can understand it's pretty gross. But listen, the reason I bring this up every year is because it does have all of the signs of what a great sponsored special event is. This contest. And it's brilliantly produced, I think, by George and Rich Shea, who founded Major League Eating and run this competition. So listen, I'm a huge fan of what Chestnut accomplishes. I kind of liken this to they can't stop the tush push. Why doesn't someone figure out how to stop the Eagles from doing that so effectively? Why can't someone figure out a way to take Joey Chestnut down, or at least get a little closer to him?
He might just be non-human.
Yeah.
So the contest was not without controversy, though, on the women's side. So I got a text on Saturday from our good friend and past guest, Ben Reiling, who wrote, "Let the debate begin. Contestant in the ladies' Nathan's contest DQ'd," and here's a quote from the event organizers, "Ms. Barone experienced urges contrary to swallowing after the contest but before the conclusion of presentation and the awarding of places. I wish our audience could see that look of bewilderment on your face. Ben and I realized that that is the nicest possible way to say that she vomited. So apparently it's not just, you don't just have to get through the contest, you have to get awarded your prize. Now, the question becomes, who gets awarded first? Is it the women's prize? Is it the men's prize? Is the men's prize winner given an advantage because he doesn't have to hold down the hot dogs as long? I would like to dig more deeply into
No,
this.
I think they do the women's and then award, and then do the men's and award. So there's probably somewhat of a close time.
But I do like that contrary to swallowing. Urges contrary to swallowing.
So I don't know if you know this, but the announcer, the play-by-play guy on the hot dog eating contest now is Jeremy Schaap. I love the fact that he's doing it.
He was there. That was his first time there. Yes.
I think it was his second time.
Was it? Okay.
I could be wrong on that.
Yeah.
Audience, check us on that. I'm not going to look it up right now.
I know one thing I don't have to look up. You know where Jeremy Schaap went to school.
God. No, and we'll move on.
Cornell.
But, yeah.
Ever hear of it?
Well, listen, I was a huge fan of, obviously, his dad, and I think he's great.
Played lacrosse at Cornell.
Wow, that's interesting.
Dick Schaap.
Well, but so Jeremy Schaap, great, great on his investigative reporting and some of those things. Paul Page is missed, I think. So Paul Page, to me, was a legendary announcer, did the Indy 500 for years and years and years, was great on motorsports calls. He was fantastic calling the hot dog eating contest. Did you happen to catch George Shea's introduction of Joey Chestnut?
I did not.
I'm kind of tempted to read it, but I don't know if I want to take the time. Anyway, it was masterful, as it always is when he introduces. Just one quick line from it. Ladies and gentlemen, while we must all face the dark mountain of night, forsaken and forlorn, alone in the ruins of our own mind, he will never fail nor falter, for he defies the ministers of our faith and the limitations of our birth. And he will not stop until he stands side by side with the gods. I was laughing so hard when I was watching it. I was watching it live, and I had to type this out because it was so funny. So George Shea,
is he quoting somebody else, or did he write that specific?
No, he generally writes these. I'm sure he pulls from all these different mythology, but he does this for almost everyone. Joey gets this unbelievable introduction, but it's unbelievable.
He's sort of the big man, right?
Born from the shards of shattered angels. That's one of the other lines in it. He wears the hat. He's great. We've tried to get George Shea on the show. He has agreed to come on, but something fell through. We are going to get this guy on the show some year before this contest. I think the guy's one of the most clever guys, and he's so entertaining to me.
That's brilliant.
All right. That's my opening salvo for the show. What about you?
Well, I want to talk WNBA. There's a couple things that are going on interconnected to one another that I find fascinating. First of all, not surprisingly, the WNBA Players Association rejected the first proposal from the league. That was to be expected. I think the term used to describe it by somebody in the Players Association was insult or joke. I forget which one. But here's what I find fascinating. The two of the co-founders of Unrivaled, Napheesa Collier, and Breanna Stewart, are both on the board for the Players Association. And some random person on X the other night mentioned the potential conflict of interest. Both Collier and Stewart denied it. They said that it's been brought up in the Players Association board. But I do think there is some merit to at least a potential or apparent conflict of interest, because these women and their league could benefit from a work stoppage in the WNBA. I am not suggesting for even a second that they would do anything to undermine the collective bargaining agreement, but I do think that I don't think the person who raised that issue was out of line in doing so.
I agree. I do think it absolutely at least begs the questions. I think the thing that makes it a little bit tough with the WNBA is the salaries aren't all that yet, right? Like you have, the Paige Beckers or the...
Wait, what? That's an understatement.
Right. So you have the Paige Beckers and the Caitlin Clarks of the world and Breanna Stewarts and A'ja Wilson, having back from a college standpoint, not so much Breanna and Asia, but because it's all happened so quickly, Paige and Caitlin making the kind of money that they had the ability to make in college, and the endorsements that then carried through for them. And that's not equaled on the salary side. However, you'd like to think that, and this might be total wishful thinking, complete idiot David being, overly optimistic here in a
Listen, you do enough for this show. Don't start taking on my role as the idiot, okay?
Well, I don't want to be I don't want to be Pollyannish about that. But if there was ever a league to say we're all in this together, and that meaning PA working very closely with the league. And, we should I almost wonder if we should get Christine Brennan, who I think is one of the great voices speaking about this league and talking about some of the challenges that they've had and the way they're treating some of their stars, et cetera, particularly Caitlin Clark. They need to come together to advance, to get this to the point where the salaries are raised, that the popularity continues, and that popularity is balanced out across the league. So I think they all have a lot to gain by working together. But I agree. I don't think it's not an unfair question. It's an obvious. It's a pretty logical question, and they should have a pretty straightforward answer.
Yeah. So the league is making at least 4 times as much in the new media deal as they did in the last one. And yes, I understand the owners have never made a profit in this league, but something has to be done to start to bring these players' salaries up. I read this, which I found incredible today. If you make the WNBA All-Star team, you get paid $2,575 to make the team. If you win the MVP, you get an additional $5,150. If you win the 3-point shooting contest, you get another $2,575. So it's crazy. These women are not making a lot of money. We go back to the tragic situation with Brittany Griner when she was detained unlawfully in Russia. It was because she was over there playing, as a lot of players in the WNBA did, played overseas to supplement their income and make a lot more money playing overseas than they do in the WNBA. So something's got to be done. I'm not saying that, it's interesting. I remember many years ago, the MLS Players Association was threatening to strike as they were going through their negotiating with the league. And Kathy Carter, who was at the league at that point, said something really interesting. She said the league is bargaining for an agreement that's probably 2 agreements from now, meaning that they were shooting so far. And so that's where you have to sort of come back down to earth a little bit if you're the Players Association. Yes, the league has grown dramatically. Yes, there's great players. Yes, the level of play has improved and all those things. But the fact of the matter is ownership has not made a dime over the 26, 27 years in the league, of the league's history.
And I don't think you can blame it all on lack of promotion and lack of support, because there clearly is. I think there is a belief behind the W right now, and we're seeing that from ownership. We're seeing that from brands a little more now, but it needs to continue. At the same time, as you said to open this, there's no shock that they rejected the initial, because what would a Players Association be if they didn't?
Right.
Okay.
As I tell people, if somebody accepts your first offer, guess what? Your first offer was too low.
I get someone to help you with your first offer. All right. I want to talk, partly because of our guest 2 weeks ago, Joey Chestnut, president of the NASCAR Chicago street race that took place over this weekend. I wasn't able to watch it live, but I picked up. I wanted to let you know I actually watched the alt broadcast that past guest Jeff Burton hosted along with Larry McReynolds. He did a great job. It was quite fun. It was very different than watching a normal broadcast, similar to watching the Manning cast during NFL games, but it was nice. And I think Jeff in that environment actually does a pretty nice job. It also happened to be the one that I had, pardon the expression for being dated, but DVR'd on my YouTube TV. I didn't realize that when I pressed the button that was the one I was going to watch, but it ended up being nice that I watched it. The race is very cool, and as Julie pointed out, it's an unbelievable commercial for the city of Chicago. There were a couple wrecks on these narrow streets that just reminded you of a Benny Hill skit, like, just cars piled up and nowhere to go. It was like a wreck on on a highway, a traffic jam that results in a wreck where cars just pile up. And so that's kind of funny. SVG, Shane van Gisbergen, wins again. He's our guy, man.
He's your boy on a street race.
Yeah.
So one more street race, or a road course, I
Yeah.
should say. It's not a street race,
Right.
but the Roval in Charlotte during the playoffs. So we'll see if he can make some hay during
He
that.
dominated. Michael McDowell, who was mentioned during our talk with Julie, who was racing with the DePaul livery, he was leading the race for a good chunk of it, had some mechanical problems, so that was a bummer. But one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is because we had Julie, who was an unbelievable guest, and she told us a lot of great stuff about that race, how it came to be, et cetera, is that the contract's up. So the city is deciding whether or not it's going to get together. The mayor, Brandon Johnson, has said he's up for extending it for another couple years, but they want a different date. You know what the NASCAR schedule's like.
Yeah.
I mean, this is on the 4th of July, but that's a huge lift for the city of Chicago on that weekend. So I think Chicago wants to keep it, but they're going to have to try to look for another date. So we will see if that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easier for a traditional track to change the date than it is for the for the city.
Oh yeah.
Well, I should say it's easier because historically the 4th of July race was always the Coke 600 or the Daytona race.
Correct. Firecracker
500, and I think Diet Coke might have sponsored it at one point. But it's easier, I should say, it's probably better to have it if you're going to have a street course on a non-holiday weekend from the city's perspective. But any weekend in this city of Chicago in the summer is going to be a tough weekend, I imagine.
Yeah, but it will be interesting if they decide, we've talked about possibility of San Diego coming on as a street race. Does the street race become something that moves? I don't know. A lot has been invested in this. The NASCAR put a permanent office, as Julie let us know. She had a great quote because they were asking her about, are you willing to look at dates? She goes, we're meeting with them. Of course we're willing to talk. I just love the fact that she said, well, of course we're in discussions and we want to do it. We're talking to them. So that means that we're open to hearing what has to get done. Kind of love that from her. Anyway, the race did pretty well. It was slightly up in viewership. It got 2.1 million on average on TNT. And listen, I'm a complete Chicago homer. I like watching this race. I want to get to it at some point. I haven't been able to yet. I'd love to see it continue, but if not, I think they'll find another street race, race to run in some cool place in the U.S.
Yeah, I think Chicago continues to be an important market for NASCAR, So hopefully they'll be able to make that work somehow.
What else you got?
A couple quick hits.
Quick hits. We're about to share some tidbits. Things that didn't make it on the main list. Doesn't mean we think they're not worth a
Sad news in global football, specifically the Premier League. 𝘮𝘅𝘍𝘍, forward for Liverpool, died tragically with his brother, I think 2 weeks after his wedding. I did read today that Liverpool is going to pay out his contract to his widow, which I thought was a very, very nice gesture on their part.
Yeah.
But tragic loss in global
Jota
football.
is a great player, and by all indications, unbelievable teammate, great locker room guy, has a close relationship with Mo Salah, and he performed great this year. I mean, they were so loaded, obviously, on the front line at Liverpool, but he will be a huge loss. And yes, very cool. They had to make a roster move to ensure that they would get the full payout to the family, and just a great move, but very tragic. I was in communication with some of my Liverpool friends around the world after them waking up to that news.
Just tragic. Big news in golf. The FedEx Cup winner will now be getting $10 million as opposed to the past few years where it's been $25 million. How does that work out if you're the PGA Tour trying to sell your players on that being the place to be and not live?
Tell me more. I did not see this. I'm not as up on that as I should be, obviously.
What they're doing is they're spreading the prize money out over other events and lower down into the field. But yeah, well, I read going from $25 million to $10 million.
Okay. Total prize pool. Prize pool across it. More?
No, the winner gets.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But I understand what you're saying.
So other players,
the winner gets less, but is the total pool the same or more?
I think
total for all.
I think it's the same.
Okay, so they just spread it out more.
Yes.
All right. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's a diplomatic way to put it. I know we don't like to touch on politics on this show. Off the air is a different issue between you and me, but that's not something we need to share with our listeners. And this is not intended to be political, but Paramount is seeking regulatory approval from the FCC on its merger with Stardance Media. And so they signed a deal in which they were going to pay the Department of Justice or the FCC. No, I lie. They were going to pay $16 million that go to the Trump's library for a lawsuit that President Trump filed against Paramount, claiming that they deceptively edited an interview with Kamala Harris. Now, I am going to have to get a Band-Aid because I'm biting my tongue so hard right now not to make this political, but there is some question as to whether advertisers are going to move their spends away in certain instances from CBS Sports because of this. So I did bring it back to the business of sports. So it'll be interesting to see. My initial thought is it won't have any material impact on advertising sales. I think that the audience that any sports programming delivers is valuable, and advertisers will go where they will get the best bang for their buck.
Yeah, and sports continues to be that. And even though, yes, we try to avoid it, but it doesn't try to avoid the topics that we like to talk about.
Yeah.
And we talked about it at the time of the election that we could expect that there will be some more politicization.
Yeah.
Politicization of sports from the UFC and the relationship that the president has with Dana White. I mean, he mentions him regularly. There's talk about having a UFC event held on the grounds of the White House. Truth settlements like this. So there will always be a little bit of that, but you know, advertising dollars seek the eyeballs and the demographic, not just the eyeballs, but the demographic of that and what it makes. And sports continues to be super sought after for not only the stickiness of it, but for the demographic that might be hard to reach and the relationships that the followers and the fans have with those properties. So I continue to, and there also happens to be that nice little wall, right? Somewhat of a wall between sports divisions and the rest of the editorial side, the news side of the business. Right. The money's all going into the same spot. And so, listen, I do, there's every media outlet, including those that are spending money for rights to broadcast sports, they're nervous right now. Because any step of the way when it comes to news coverage could trigger some action that's taken to put them in a tough situation. And then you get settlements like this one that you have in this that I think Paramount. And the number compared to some others wasn't all that big, $16.5 million, as you said. It's a lot of money, but it's not a massive payout. And I think they just decided let's not fight it. Right? Like a lot of lawsuits get settled anyway.
Yes. And I read another article today talking about the mix of politics and sports. The Buffalo Bills are somewhat concerned because a significant part of their fan base comes from Ontario because, their proximity to the border. I think I read that they have 8,000 season ticket holders who are Canadian. And because there has been such a decline in travel from Canada to the U.S., they're concerned that it might have an impact on their revenues this year. So there'll be something to keep an eye on. It'll be my sense is that it probably won't. I think people, whatever they might feel about this current administration or our country right now, they're football fans, right? And they're Buffalo Bills fans, and they'll probably come across the border and go to the games. That's my sense, but we'll see. We'll see in a couple months when the season opens.
Ready to take a break?
Sure.
We got a great guest coming up. Very excited about.
It's time for our guest.
We are thrilled to be joined by Vanessa Tavares, Chief Partnerships Officer of what I would consider one of the most intriguing properties of 2025, Athletes Unlimited, a professional women's sports organization with a very different twist. Vanessa joined AU early this year after building a reputation as a top property sales executive, holding leadership positions at IMG Academy, CSM, now folded into Wasserman, as well as SJX Partners and Velocity, where you worked with many of our favorite people in this business. You and I first met, I believe, when we were talking about a partnership with between Staples and Little League, and I have very fond memories of that. So with that, welcome, Vanessa.
Thanks so much for the intro. It's great to be here. Those were some of my most fun days for sure. And now I'm in this role where a lot of that's coming full circle. I'm back working with several of the folks that we worked with back in those days. So super fun.
Yeah, that's great. All right, we're just going to go ahead and jump in, and I'm going to ask about the most general question I could possibly ask to start this. Give us an overview of what you're building at Athletes Unlimited.
Well, to your point, David, I arrived here at Athletes Unlimited just a few months ago. I joined the organization late February. So most of what we're building and what we've built, I can claim no credit for being involved in, but certainly saw the vision and was really excited about the opportunity to join the organization, have a huge amount of respect for what they've been able to do over the last 5 years and to continue the evolution. And, you pointed to it with the launch of the AUSL this year is just super exciting. But if we take a step all the way back, Athletes Unlimited was co-founded by Jonathan Soros and John Patricof. In March of 2020, they launched, which was an opportune time, obviously, for live sports and events. And, I think the timing itself ultimately impacted what Athletes Unlimited became and what it represents today. But the organization was really founded with the notion that women's professional sports was on the precipice. They saw the opportunity and sort of the white space here, the growth potential, but wanted to take a different tack at it and really endeavor to put the athletes at the center of everything the league and organization did. And so they built Athletes Unlimited from the ground up with an incredible group of colleagues of mine now, really with that centerpiece that the athletes sit at the center of everything we do. The leagues were designed with the athletes in mind. The athletes play an active role in the governance of the organization. So with every sport that we operate, we have a player executive committee that designs the rules, the rosters, ultimately the governance of the league. We have athlete representation on the board of the organization. So truly we are walking the walk as it relates to centering the athletes and putting them in the driver's seat of how the league is built and operate. And we are exactly what you said. We're a multi-sport organization. So we show up currently in the form of leagues in professional volleyball, basketball, and softball, and have recently, and we can get into the details, extended our footprint in softball with the launch of the AUSL this year.
Yeah, speaking of the AUSL, which stands for Athletes Unlimited Softball League, for those of our listeners who don't know what that stands for, you've got a championship series that's coming up later this month in Tuscaloosa. It's the first year that you've had this sort of traditional league format, but later in the summer in August, you'll have the All-Star Cup outside of Chicago under your original model, which is a unique competition, more focused on individuals' performances. What makes this special, and why also having the now more traditional format as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in the traditional Athletes Unlimited format, we operate compressed tournament-style seasons that historically have really taken place in the off season of what is the established league of that sport. So if you use basketball as an example, we have a 4-week season that happens in the month of February. The majority of our roster are active WNBA players. They are in their off season and they're looking for a place to compete domestically, earn money, elevate their platform, and be with their friends. And so that's really what Athletes Unlimited was founded to do. We do the same in volleyball. Our season happens in the fall, which is the off season of the domestic pro leagues and also the international ones. So all the top talent from across the world can come together for a 4-week season. And to your point, Tim, the model is that they compete in a team sport, but for an individual champion. And the primary driver of that is that it allows the athletes to become the center of the conversation versus the brand of a team or the owner of a team. This is really, truly all about the athletes. So there's a roster, or there's a full roster, there's a leaderboard. It's a very fast-paced environment where ultimately there's a prize purse that not just the champion participates in, but across the league. And softball was actually the first sport they launched with in 2020. The nuance in softball is that all of the key stakeholders sat around watching the growth of this and the success of this league and realized that there wasn't a well-funded, sustainable professional softball league in this country. And so I'm not sure that it was ever the business model that John and Jonathan intended to launch a traditional team-based league, but the marketplace called for it and the opportunity was there. And we had all of the right stakeholders at the table. Softball's coming back into the Olympics in 2028. So this is the window to do it. ESPN is our broadcast partner, and they have massive success in the College Softball World Series every year. And then sort of have this rabid fan base that you leave with nowhere to go and these athletes with nowhere domestically to play. And so over the last 12 to 18 months, that was really the conversation that took place and what led to the development of the AUSL and the launch of that as a complement to the traditional AU format. And so we are playing this full traditional team-based season, and then it will culminate in the All-Star Cup, which is the historic AU model, which the athletes are incredibly excited about because now they've spent a full season playing with and against each other, and they get to come into this environment where all 60 of them will live together in one market, compete on a regular basis in a more kind of almost fantasy style competition to crown one champion. So we're really excited about the way the two will complement each other in this offering. But that's kind of the background of how the AUSL was built and why we stepped in to launch that more traditional league.
What a novel idea, like launching something based on seeing the market opportunity.
Yeah,
yeah.
A few stakeholders at the table with us that saw it as well, right? And it's like,
Right.
if we don't do it, somebody has
No
to.
doubt.
Why
no
not
doubt.
us, right?
Yeah, and you mentioned the College Softball World Series was so dynamic this year. I mean, that was a thrill every game.
Hold on, David. Time out.
He's probably going to mention Cornell here. I'm just
No,
sensing
stop.
a Cornell mention somehow.
Forget it. I was going
No.
to. Vanessa, we have a tradition on the show when one of our guests says great question. The tradition is that the person who did not write the question gives credit to the person who did write the question.
Got it.
However, in this case, I'm not going to give credit to David. I will make
For
a
writing
comment
a
about
great
Cornell,
question.
the greatest university in the history of the planet. So please.
Sorry, Tim. Thank you for that. It was we kind of mix them up and just ask the question as they come up. So that's
Right.
the
It's a
team
mystery.
that
I
we
don't know
are.
who wrote
That's
what.
the team. You're not supposed to know. That's the beauty of this little stupid game that we play, but it's a wonderful one as well. And we appreciate you acknowledging the question.
That great
Hi, I'm
question.
Tim, and I'm 12.
So the concept this year, it's kind of a barnstorming. There's no official city or town or state designation to the teams, but that's changing next year,
That's
right?
right.
What can you tell us about the teams, the cities, the areas, the geographies that will be involved? And I have to think you're already thinking expansion. So what does that mean for, say, 2, 3, 5 years down the road?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, getting the league off the ground, building the awareness, the visibility, and the fan base from what we already had with the Athletes Unlimited fan base, and of course, what we already talked about in terms of the college softball fan base, the addition of MLB as an investor and a partner, and bringing that fan base into our world and sort of seeing how it translates. And for the first time, building brands for teams. We have 4 teams this year: the Blaze, the Bandits, the Volts, and the Talons was the priority. And so the Barnstorm is really to generate, obviously exposure more broadly and stir up excitement about the league in as many markets as possible. We ended up visiting 10 cities on this tour because the desire and the interest when we put out the RFP for markets back in the fall exceeded our expectations. And so that's what we did. But the plan and the model is, to your point, to expand pretty quickly. So next year, the vision is to expand from 4 teams to 6 and attach to those 6 teams to home markets. And And so, in a nice way, a lot about what we're doing this summer is a little bit of an interview of the markets to see how fan bases turn out. And we're seeing sellout crowds in so many of these markets, which is amazing. Looking at infrastructure questions, right? We're not in a situation where we're going to own our own facilities at any point in the near future. And so finding the right homes that can service our needs, the right size of ballpark to play in. Important to us as the professional league in softball that a softball diamond and a baseball diamond are different. And so showing up, we can convert baseball fields to softball fields, but we're the professional league. We want to be playing in stadiums that were designed for softball. And so there's a lot of factors that come into play. And so we're learning a lot this year. And ultimately, probably towards the end of the season, we'll be able to select and ultimately announce 6 home markets for our teams next year. With that being said, I think, we're also partners with Major League Baseball, who has perfected this idea of neutral site games, different types of opportunities. And so while we hope to build a real presence and identity in the communities that we ultimately call home, the AUSL belongs to everybody, right? And so we'll want to continue to show up in as many communities as we can and bring as many fans to the sport of softball as we can.
Around the same time you guys made the announcement of MLB's investment, you also announced that Kim Ng was going to become the commissioner of the AUSL. Talk about the significance of that announcement. Not only, is she a glass ceiling breaker, she's also a brilliant baseball mind.
Mm-hmm. And she was an elite softball player. So I think, if you hear Kim tell her story, she played softball through college. She played at the University of Chicago because she's a dummy, obviously.
Huh.
But, she started her career at the White Sox because there was nowhere else to go with softball. Her career had ended there and she moved into the baseball space, and obviously over the course of 30 years built an incredible, not just resume, but reputation. She's amazing. I think bringing her back to the softball space at this phase in her career, she was, during her time at the league office at MLB, really actively involved with the development team and sort of supported the growth of softball and MLB's efforts there throughout the year. So these are all things that I've learned since I got here. I just knew her, from the headlines as being, to your point, just a woman in this business who has absolutely shattered glass ceilings and built an incredible reputation. But it's been a real thrill for me to get to know her as a person and as a leader in this process. But I think the other thing to point to in terms of her impact, obviously her relationship with Major League Baseball, having worked in that sport for including that stretch in the league office, is that she has the respect of all of the key stakeholders. And so Kim was announced as the commissioner of the league this spring, but she really joined the organization as an advisor to help build what the AUSL would become last summer when this entire concept kind of came to fruition. So she's really been, at the table throughout this design, build, and launch phase. And when you think about who our advisors are and the folks that have been involved in the efforts to get this off the ground, in addition to the co-founders, John and Jonathan and the leadership at Athletes Unlimited, it's Jenny Finch, Jess Mendoza, Kat Osterman, who is an advisor and also a GM of one of the teams, Natasha Watley, Lisa Fernandez, arguably the GOAT of softball, who's the GM of the Talons. This is the Mount Rushmore of softball.
Yeah.
And if you ask any of them why they're here, they point to Kim and say, we trust her. We want to be part of what she's building. And everybody is grateful to, sort of the foundation that Athletes Unlimited built and the infrastructure that we have within the organization. But I just think the impact that she has within not just baseball, but as it's coming to bear, softball as well, has been really incredible. And so, yeah, and it's just personally a thrill for me to be able to call her a colleague at this stage of my career.
I want to go up to more of a 30,000-foot level with the next question. A lot of things related to women's sports are front and center in the sports business these days, for all the right reasons, mostly. And it's very bullish. We talk about women's sports on this podcast quite a bit, actually. But I wanted to get your perspective about what is this moment for women's sports, and how does Athletes Unlimited fit into that?
Yeah, I think, look, it's incredible. We talked about my sort of background and, how I grew up in this business. I spent more than 20 years on the agency side, sort of selling sponsorships from a third party perspective. And so I worked with all different kinds of rights holders over the years, including a couple of women's professional, leagues and organizations. I think the coming back to women's sports in this moment and seeing the difference, obviously, from sort of the consumer and the fan base and also just sort of the industry executive perspective, but now really seeing it operationally and from, sort of a business development seat, the way we're able to talk about women's sports as business decisions that sit on their own credentials, that have the metrics to support the asks and the demands, right? The asks and the demands is so unique. I think, as recently as 2022, I was selling for a professional women's sports organization where, the conversation with brands was really sort of like, it's the right thing to do. And so you should, look at adding a little equity into your portfolio. If you're spending, $1 billion in men's sports, why don't you think about adding something to be able to speak to this audience? That conversation has changed entirely, right? And so I think it's super exciting. The moment in time in women's sports and the way that the business has accelerated, I think is well documented from all perspectives. But I sit in, a unique space where I'm calling on brands, on CMOs, on agencies to consider opportunities. And specifically through that lens, I think the narrative has shifted. Now, there's still a long way to go, right? From the opportunity perspective, the intrigue, but not the ability to sort of pull the trigger perspective on big deals from the brand seat. But I think the shift in the way, the narrative and the way we're able to talk about this from a business perspective is really encouraging. And, I came to this opportunity a few months ago, really excited about the chance to, at this stage, be selling something that I feel personally connected to and passionate about, but also because, I wanted to believe that moment was carrying through to the sort of decision maker seat from a brand perspective. And so starting to see that bear out, which is exciting.
So when you get in the room with the brand, what is the pitch? Because I think there still are some brand side marketers out there who feel like they need to check the box with women's sports, and I find that almost insulting, quite frankly. So what is the pitch when you're in the room with a brand?
I think the most fun thing for me and the way that I love to approach all of this from a partnership perspective over the course of my career, and it's not the same for every property. I don't speak for every women's sports property by any stretch, but the most fun thing for me is that there's a real opportunity to get creative, right? So tell me what your goals are. Tell me what you want to do. Tell me what you want to be in this space, and let's build something. Women's sports more generally, I think, have been in this build of momentum and build moment where the brands that saw that opportunity got on board and said, let us help you. Let us be a part of that, as opposed to, where can I put my logo? And, what are at the end of the day, of course, like what are the ROI points? What's the metrics? All of that continues to be important, but there's a unique opportunity for brands in this space still, even though, we're on this sort of trajectory over the last several years to truly co-create and do things in the women's sports space that I just don't think are as feasible in other spaces anymore. And that for me that's the most fun part about getting in a room with a brand like that is, there's no wrong answer here. Like, let me tell you about us. Let me tell you about our values. Let me tell you about where we show up, how we show up, who we are, who our athletes are, and why we're here. And let's hear about you, and then let's build something together. And that's exciting.
Great. You've touched on this through a number of your answers here, but I really wanted you posted something on LinkedIn recently, maybe last week, that I saw and was quite emotional, I thought, about your time, even though it hasn't been that long at AU. And I wanted you to, why is this so special? You've sold major properties to major brands. You've worked with some of the best people in this business. And I was struck by what you were writing there. And I just wanted you to have an opportunity to say, why is this all so special?
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, it's not brain surgery, what we're doing, but it's meaningful and it can really mean something to people. Standing there in Chicago for the opening weekend of the AUSL, again, having joined this organization only a few months prior and been sort of on this sprint to get to the starting line with, my new colleagues, standing there and watching these athletes have this moment and this opportunity and this experience and how much it meant to them. And then the stands full of fans across the spectrum. But then in particular, we do at AU, and I know other organizations do it as well. At the end of every game, we do autograph signing for every kid in that place. So they line up and the athletes stay and they sign every last autograph, take every selfie, because it's what they want to do. The impact of that when you see these young girls out there wearing their softball jerseys, holding their signs that, are effectively that effective, like, I can see it, so I know I can be it. It hits different. It really does. And I have an 8-year-old who plays softball, and, so to be able to tell her that this is what I do for a living, really feels like something more personal and more special. I think I posted in that post, some of my college roommates live in Chicago and came to the game and have young boys who they came up to me like decked out in the merch, ran the bases after the game, got the autographs of the athletes. This isn't just about, young girls by any stretch. It's about all fans. But I think that the impact that these athletes, the connection that these athletes feel to that next generation is unique in this space. It really is.
I feel bad about my younger daughter was a pretty decent softball player. She was young, and she went to a DePaul camp. DePaul had a great program, and we didn't tell her that it was a fast pitch league. so she instantly went from, kind of playing, and she could hit and catch and throw the ball pretty well. And she's like, are you guys insane?
It comes at you. It comes at you fast and hard, right?
I'd like to say it wasn't totally my fault, but that would feel like I was passing responsibility.
Right.
Anyway,
No, it's
I hate
incredible.
that. I hate that because she was quite good.
It's been incredible to see. And candidly, softball wasn't my sport. I didn't play as a kid. But, to your mention early, David, I sold Little League for almost 15 years on the agency side. And so, and this was before I had kids, which is the great part. Now I am like literally the Little League mom and all those years that we were selling it. So, I understood that community and the impact and that grassroots nature through that work. And then, I've got a team including a retired professional softball player, an Olympic silver medalist who's on my partnerships team, talking to brands. And you talk about passion. Like, she's given her entire life to this sport. She played AU for the first 4 seasons, just retired in the fall, and now is selling partnerships with us. So, while softball wasn't necessarily what I grew up playing, I understand sort of the dynamic of what role sports can play for brands. And then I get to bring somebody like her and her silver medal to meetings, right, to talk about the impact of softball. So it makes my job even easier.
So before we let you go, Vanessa, we have 2 questions that we ask all our guests. Don't worry, they're not tricky or anything. The first one is,
where'd your career get started? Where'd you started?
I got my start in the sports business. My first job was at Octagon, coming right out of school. I was lucky enough to have family who worked in advertising and media. My only goal, I went to Michigan. I grew up in Michigan. My explicit goal coming out of school was to move to New York. That's all I wanted to do. And I knew the advertising and the media business a little bit because of my family connections. And I always thought it was so incredible that, my uncle worked in advertising and he could tell me about an ad campaign he was working on in New York. And then I would see it on TV in Battle Creek, Michigan. And I wanted to do something where I could see the outcome of my work in that way. But as I was coming out of school, another relative of mine worked in marketing, and he was at what was Nextel at the time. And they were starting to get in the sponsorship space. And so he knew I was an athlete. I was a huge sports fan my whole life. And he's like, I don't know, we're getting into this space and we're working with this agency. And I think this would actually be what you want to do. So complete sort of luck in terms of timing. And I think what everybody comes back to in terms of having a connection, a way in, that ended up being sort of the launching point for my career. Again, starting at Octagon and then spending more than 20 years on the agency side. And it was all through, a quick connection from my cousin to the folks at Octagon. And I pointed that I actually do quite a bit of work, and it's really important to me to develop and mentor young people in this business and ensure that there are accessible pathways into the sports business for underrepresented communities. In particular, I'm on the board of an organization called Sports Biz Careers. And I talk about that story a lot and how, I was lucky to have that connection. And at the same time, not everybody is. And I think I watched, over the course of my career, so many young people come into this business because they knew someone. And so that was their first point of entry. And so it's one of the things that I feel really passionate about is leaning on executives and folks in this industry to be that person for other people that don't necessarily have a personal network like that. But that was how I got started.
And so the last question we have is, what one piece of advice would you give to somebody? Obviously, you've probably been asked many times for advice. What's the one piece of advice you would give to somebody looking to break into the sports industry?
I think one of the clear sort of there's a lot, right? But one of them is network vertically and horizontally. Some of the people that have been most impactful in my career were the people that led the businesses that I was involved in, the clients that led businesses I was involved in when I was young. But really, I look to, who are my peers now all these years later, and we started together in those intern seats and trying to find what the best opportunity was for us. And now some of these people that, again, I started out with and grew up with have incredible roles and are running massive, operations within the industry. And so that's one that I feel like is sometimes overlooked that I like to tell people. Make sure that you're networking to senior level people, but also that you're building strong relationships with your peers and folks that are in a similar seat from you.
That's great. I love that.
Right.
We haven't heard that said that way before. I love it.
Several of them have been on the podcast.
Vanessa, we can't thank you enough. That was a wonderful discussion. We learned a lot about what is going on with Athletes Unlimited, the softball league, et cetera. And it's just great catching up with you. You've had a really, really great career. You're close to some of the people that we respect the most in this industry, and you're on that list as well. So thank you. Appreciate your time.
I can't thank you enough for the invite. It was great to see you both. I appreciate it. Tune in, come out to a game. And I hope we can catch up live in person, not just shameless plugs, but, over a coffee or a beer sometime soon.
So we are back. That was a very fun discussion with Vanessa. A lot of exciting things obviously going on with Athletes Unlimited. And it was just kind of great to get very unique property. And I think given the MLB news, a lot of good things in front of them. All right, we are coming to the finish here. And now is that time where we take a bit of look ahead, maybe do some shout outs. So Tim, what do you have your eye on?
So I've got a couple of shout outs I want to give. First of all, shout out to Randy Moss, who is done with his cancer treatments, and he's going to be returning full time to the Sunday NFL Countdown on ESPN. So that's great news for him. So happy to see that. Also, shortly before we came on the air, saw the ratings for the CONCACAF Gold Cup. So it was not a 2-0, it was 2-1, but Mexico prevailed. They outplayed the U.S. Significantly throughout the entire tournament. But they averaged 3.73 million viewers on Fox. They said that the out-of-home viewing added about 30% to that in-home audience number, and so that bodes well in Fox's estimation for next year for FIFA World Cup.
Yeah, real quick on that final game did very well, but I think overall, and it had a great attendance, but overall they had some down things. Again, I question the timing of this, and I feel a little bad that it didn't get as much attention as it might have. Of course, the new coach of the U.S. men's national team, I think, was seeing the fans because the game was played in Houston, the final, and there was a huge Mexican fan contingent. Of course, the U.S. coach, Italian gentleman, I'm sure I can...
Pochettino.
Yes, Pochettino. Mauricio was saying how this is what we need next year. And I like the fact that he said that. But yeah, no, they made the finals, but they didn't have particularly great wins throughout the tournament, but they did get there, and they were missing some of their top players.
They were missing some of their top players, but some players really stepped up. Greg Berhalter's son, playing on the team, played really well.
A couple of things from my side. I want to give a shout out to Nico Hülkenberg, who finally got his podium after 239 races at the kind of the classic, OG of Grand Prix, the British Grand Prix this past weekend. So congratulations to Nico. He was a MoneyGram Haas F1 driver for the years that I was there. He now races for Sauber, will be racing for the Audi team next year. And congrats to his manager, Raul Spanger, and his trainer, Alex. These guys put in a lot of hard work, and it was great to see him. I was very happy to see that. Speaking of F1, there was huge news coming out of F1 that broke this morning. And the reason I want to bring it up is because Christian Horner, the team principal and CEO of Red Bull Racing, who has had dominating performances over much of the last, recent history. And they didn't win the team championship, the constructors last year, but Max won his 4th overall world championship, driving championship. The reason this is significant is that role of that team was like if Andy Reid, Brett Veach, the general manager, and Mark Donovan, the president of the Chiefs, all got fired at once. So it's quite significant. Now, there was some scandal that he survived a few years ago. There was a questionable relationship between their star Max Verstappen and Christian Horner, and a lot of people wanted him out. Anyway, I bring it up because it is somewhat seismic, and I want to follow up and see what's going on and see how this is reported on. But it was a bit of a shocker. Not that we all knew that there was some talk, but the fact that it broke like it did and caught some people off guard was interesting. I also want to give you a shout out because you made a post on LinkedIn today that I just thought was unbelievable about imposter syndrome. I do think we all experience that, if not always, from time to time. And you just did a great job of verbalizing. You do a great job in that, and you provide a great service to people. So I wanted to give you a shout out for that. But I also want to add that, the one thing we definitely are not imposters at is the production of this podcast.
No. And well, thank you, first of all, for the kind words. I do think it has resonated with a lot of people. Sort of like the Police song, Message in a Bottle, right? But I also want to say that, no, we are not imposters when it comes to the podcasting business. We are incredible experts. We're global phenomenon. I think that's...
it's fair to say.
That's not even a subject of debate.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. All right. Well, that wraps up episode 118, partner. How about that?
Wow. And they said it wouldn't last.
Yeah. Big thanks to Vanessa Tavares from Athletes Unlimited for joining us. We'll definitely have our eyes out on them, and maybe I will get to Chicago and get to Rosemont to see some action there. Tim, thank you. And of course, thank you all for spending a little time with us. We'd love for you to sample our content across multiple platforms, from YouTube to TikTok, of course, to LinkedIn, and obviously on Spotify and Apple as well. Rate us, write us comments, tell us what you like, where you think we're full of shit. As Tim mentioned recently, we're big boys. We can take it.
No, I don't like it. I don't like criticism. I am a Cancer. I am incredibly overly sensitive.
The point is we can take it. We don't know how we're going to react when we don't take
like it.
We don't. We definitely don't like it.
No,
we definitely don't like it. But if it gives us a reason to fire back, whatever. No, we certainly prefer it just being all positive. But yeah, whatever.
Okay.
Who are we to tell you what to do? Anyway, until next time, I'm DP. He's McGhee, and we'll talk soon.